The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the individuals participating in the show. All persons described or mentioned in the podcast should be considered innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. This podcast contains subject matter such as violence and graphic descriptions along with adult language, which may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
On October 16th, 1980, a woman is found dead in rural Washington County, Arkansas. She was shot behind her right ear, and her killer then backed over her body while leaving the scene. Her case remains unsolved to this day. Join us tonight as we discuss her case with two private investigators near Fayetteville, Arkansas. You're listening to the Mysterious Brews podcast, and tonight we bring you the case of Gail Vaught.
Sometime around midnight on October 16, 1980, Gail Jean Vaught was brutally shot behind her right ear with a .22 caliber pistol. She was then crushed by the murderer's vehicle when they backed over her body while exiting the desolate country road in rural Washington County, Arkansas. Gail was just 21 years old, with a great job and living in Fayetteville, Arkansas, before her body was found on a logging road by a passerby around 10 a.m. the next day. Join us as I, a certified Arkansas private investigator, with the help of numerous other investigators, work to solve this 42-year-old homicide, a case that's wrought with tales of Dixie Mafia, drug trafficking, corrupt law enforcement, and prominent business leaders in what some might call just another Ozark mountain murder.
Welcome to a deep, dark, dank, moist basement somewhere in the bowels of Georgia. Tonight we have two special guests with us, two private investigators from Fayetteville.
We're back in Arkansas, y'all.
That's right. We're back in Arkansas. We keep going to the well when we need something good. But we were graciously contacted by Mr. Billy Bell and his sidekick Elaine, or maybe Elaine's sidekick is Billy. We ain't figured that one out yet. But we have got a doozy of a case for y'all tonight. These two private investigators have championed Gail's cause, I guess is a good way to put it. This is an unsolved mystery from 1980. Gail was 21 years old when she passed, and we'll just get into, y'all can go ahead and just tell us a little bit about what kind of person Gail was and how she came to move to Fayetteville, because she wasn't originally from there, was she?
No, she wasn't. And thank you guys for having us on. Like you say, we picked this case up and doing our best to resolve it for the family, the surviving family of Gail Vaught. Yeah, Gail was originally born in Mountainburg, Arkansas, which is about, 30 minutes south of Fayetteville on Highway 71, between Fayetteville and Fort Smith. And small town, small Ozark Mountain hamlet town. And she was, raised up as a country girl and actually was a phenomenal basketball player. She even played college ball for 1 year, and then she changed paths and went to work on a road crew and ended up in Fayetteville, working on Highway 71 bypass. And in October, she was murdered and left for dead on a old logging road. So, and her family, both of her parents have since passed, and her sister, Janet, asked us to take a look at it, and that's what Elaine and I are doing, and looking forward to talking about it.
And how did were y'all approached by her, or had you heard of the case before you were approached and you had kind of, thought, well, like most cases we cover in Arkansas, you were like, hey, something doesn't smell right?
Yeah. Well, I think I spoke to you guys a few years ago about a 1984 case that I was working, and Yeah, in my research on that case, I came across a memorandum that was completed by the Arkansas State Police, CID, and it mentioned some of the same players that was in my 84 case having been suspected of murdering Gail. So just, running that lead to ground, contacted her nearest living relative, who happened to be Janet, her sister, and she was living down in Texas. And once we started talking, she was like, well, do you think you could work on Gail's case? And that was in 2016.
You had sent me, we had kind of, just to give a peek behind the curtain here, this has kind of been in the works for, almost a year? Me and you have been discussing this case. You had gotten your hands on the investigative file, and that was the first time that I had the, I guess, pleasure, is what you can say, of trying to decipher a police investigation file. There is no rhyme or reason of how their filing, how their filing system works.
Yeah, sometimes you get them and they're squared away, but I think in these parts, they're purposefully scattered.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. Yeah. There's another case out there that they finally got the case file after a conviction, and it's taken, I think, 2 months for them to even get to where they can discuss what they found.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, that was because I got frustrated at first. You had sent me the case file, and so I was like, I'm literally going to have to print this whole thing to keep it straight.
It was kind of like that time when Coach he had to read the Old Testament.
That's right. The these and the thous got him.
Yeah, for damn sure.
So, Elaine, how did you come about? Were you also did Billy just sweep you in? And he has bragged on you off air, of course, about your analytical skills and how well you can organize things. So how did you get tangled in this web?
I'm still trying to figure that part out. But as Billy said, we are both from the same southern Arkansas town, and he had asked me to look at his previous case, and, I told him it was pretty interesting, and he knows I listen to crime podcasts and I watch all those shows, and he kind of looped me in and sent me a Dropbox file and asked me if I could try to take a look at it and piece it together. And like you said, it was definitely a puzzle, and I started getting deeper and deeper in it and making notes. I had a notepad, and I just started writing down people that I thought he needed to talk to that weren't questioned back in 1980, and really just trying to do a mental picture of drawing lines together. I told him I needed to get a pin board with the string and start making connections, because it was a very complicated file to try to go through.
It was, and that was one thing that I noticed was just you got some fringe players out there, and so you're trying to keep names straight. And that I have a notebook dedicated to this this case file. So, but there's, Billy and I had talked a couple of times, and some information that he shared with me. It's just, I'm with you. This will consume you. A whole wall of my house could have been consumed with red string and pens and photos and interview papers. But it is a wild case. And the thing that I noticed also, just trying to do some background research on it, it's not very well publicized. I think I found maybe 2 articles back from when it happened, and it was just very kind of vanilla.
Well, that's been the enigma, with this case. One of the things that I found early on, just like you did, is that if you go, typically states have, the top 10 unsolved old cases. I mean, especially in the last 5-6 years, with true crime being so popular.
Yeah.
But Arkansas had that one, right? But, Gail Vaught wasn't anywhere near it. No one knew anything. No one, as far as I know, ever showed any interest besides Janet, her sister.
And she kind of kept the case. Her mom and her sister is the one that kind of kept the case alive, just trying to, not necessarily not necessarily in the press, but they were they were their own investigative team.
Yeah, and they were pressing law enforcement, Washington County Sheriff's Department. And from time, every time, they would talk to the same guy who handled it. He was still there in 1980. I think he retired finally in 2018. He had, I want to say, 40 plus years on the county sheriff's department. And it was the same answer every time. Janet, and before her mom died in 1987. So it was 7 years after Gail's death. But, she started it, then Janet picked it up. And one of the things, and we'll get into, but there's biologicals that was left at the crime scene. Obviously, 1980, DNA was, 10 years from even being thought about. But at the time, they used biological specimens to type blood, so forth and so on. So there was semen left at the crime scene in a condom, which law enforcement gathered as evidence and submitted to the crime lab. Well, from 1982 on, every time the Vaught family would check in, there was nothing, or actually later on when DNA came about, when the Vaught family was started asking about it, I was destroyed, sorry, and that was it. And then we later find that, wow, there is a slide that has that semen on it. So there's still hope. And that's what we're currently awaiting right now.
I'm glad you mentioned the biologicals, because I remember one of the big things in the Atlanta child murders were them typing his blood to one of the crime scenes, and then also one of the victims, they typed his blood into the station wagon. And so a lot of people, just especially that listen to true crime podcasts now, I mean, it's not always been DNA out there. So the fact that it did survive is amazing, but also it's funny, it's kind of like the Rebecca Gould case. There was some things that we magically found this when we went and looked in the file, and same thing, they had an investigator that had blinders on in that case, and once they got a fresh set of eyes on it, within 12 months they had a suspect. So hopefully y'all can help this sister out. But let's get back to just Gail in general. How did she become, I don't know, not necessarily involved, but how did she get a job working as she was running an asphalt paver, was she not?
Yeah, it's pretty cool too. Well, like I said, she was a country girl. She grew up on a chicken farm and in Mountainburg, Arkansas, and she was the youngest of, I think, 4. And she worked on the farm with her daddy. She was a tall girl. She was, like I said, she played college ball. She was 6'2", and beautiful. Yeah, but she was just a country girl, and I guess she didn't want to, whatever females were doing back then. She wasn't interested in that. She wanted to go to work, so she got on with the road crew, DB Hill Construction, headquartered out of Little Rock, and she got on with them right after she left college in '78, working down in the Fort Smith Van Buren area. And then like late '79, early '80, she transferred up to Fayetteville to work on the Highway 71 bypass. So, and she was one of those big roller operators or grader operators or something. So,
yeah, I remember looking through the case file and the interviews that some of them had conducted with some of the people she worked with. The way I read it, and I may be completely off base, but she could operate just about anything on the yard and was not scared to do so.
I know. And that just kind of gives you an understanding of, she's not going to be that easy to kill. Right. So, that plays into our case also, is the evidence that or the pieces that Elaine and I have been trying to put together and trying to understand what happened. So and to get into that just a tad, she was dating a guy who was a known drug dealer. So this is 1980. And, pot was the big thing. Cocaine was coming out, but cocaine was mostly a rich person's candy.
Yes.
But pot was a big deal. And if you were a criminal, right, chances are you were moving some pot or you were moving speed, right? And that's what this guy did. His name was Ray Foreman. And she moved in with him. And it's been alluded to through various witness statements that she was maybe in the game, that she was maybe, working in the drug trade and or possibly informing. And that may be a motive for which she was murdered. And that's something we're looking at.
And that's one of the angles that I didn't even, when I first looked at the case file, that I didn't even think about, is either her being an informant or maybe someone in her circle there being an informant. But that would make sense with kind of how this has kind of just been swept under the rug.
Yeah, because it wasn't a sexual crime. It wasn't a crime of passion.
No.
It wasn't over somebody cheating on somebody. I mean, generally, murder only happens for a handful of reasons. So when you take those away, what's left? Well, it depends. If you're in the drug game, that opens up some possibilities. Elaine did a good job of trying to get in to Gail's persona. Elaine, what can you say about Gail and who she was at the time and what she was about?
I could relate to Gail a little bit in regards to being from a small town, wanting to get away, do her own kind of thing. But she obviously just got into that wrong crowd and wasn't sure how to possibly get out of it, because some of the interviews suggest that she may have been trying to get out. And that's how we started down this road of possibly being a CI or somebody else in the group being a CI. But, I just tried to think like a 21-year-old. Obviously, I'm not that young anymore, but I tried to put myself in her shoes and think, well, what would I do when I was working through a timeline of that week and that day, trying to match up the timeline between her and Ray Foreman, and it just didn't make sense to me. Being a female cooking dinner, and it was suggested that she was cooking dinner and, somehow she got taken from the house, but she had a jacket on. And that was the first thing I brought to Billy. I said, who is making dinner in their house wearing a coat?
And she
but
lived,
no shoes.
Didn't she live, they kind of rented like a basement apartment from an older couple.
Yes.
And so that was another thing that caught my attention too. It's crazy how you keyed in on but that's the thing, me and Billy and Coach, we can sit here and talk about stuff all the time, but we don't have that female's perspective about, okay, something just happened.
Speak for yourself, pal.
I'm sorry, he's in touch with his feminine side.
I am at peace with my feminosity.
But yeah, I mean, it's just something that we wouldn't have thought of, but you're right. It's like it was just an interruption, and it was before the days of cell phones and things like that. So,
and to give the listeners a little bit more insight. So she and Ray had spent the whole day together, and, she was in road construction and it was raining. Right. So they just spent the day together. They went and picked up a television that they had turned in for repair. Right. They had money left over for what the television cost, and they went and bought ice cream that Thursday of October 16th. And then they go home. Now, granted, a lot of this is from Ray's perspective, right? So you got to take that with a grain of salt. But his claim is then they went home and he wanted brown beans. And Elaine, what was it? Didn't she go to the store to get the beans or something?
Yes, she went to the store to get the beans and I believe a pot as well.
You have to keep reminding people, I would think back then, she didn't have a pot for beans. She's renting it from an older couple. Maybe they've got a pot she can borrow. They are obviously letting her and Ray both use their telephone because someone had called in, I think in one of the one of the interviews I had read in the file, somebody had called in and they were like, we'll leave a message. He's not here. And then he actually was there. And so that's a whole nother angle that I know y'all won't get into.
Yeah. And the people who owned the house, Barry and I believe it was Sue Frizzell, and they were about the same age, maybe in their later 20s. And so she goes and gets these beans at the store, comes back. And while she was gone, Ray got a phone call from another drug dealer, and he needed Ray to come get him to go make a drug deal. So then Ray tells it that he just took off, be back in time by the beans were done, but he didn't ever come back. And so the timeline was after Ray left, conveniently, between that time and about 10 o'clock the next morning, someone came in, snatched Gail. She had her coat on and she didn't have her shoes on. And she was found about 4 miles to the west on a logging road, murdered, having been crushed by a vehicle. And her pants she was nude from the waist down. There was evidence of sexual assault because there was a condom with semen in it, which is, again, odd. And she was dead. So that's the mystery. And then trying to figure out by the case file of everyone they spoke with, and then talking to people today, which we've done.
Yeah, and then
that's where we are.
Elaine, was there anything else that kind of stood out for you when you kind of try to put yourself in her shoes that night, or just in general working construction?
Reading the interviews from the people she worked with, it seemed like she was pretty well respected by a lot of the guys that worked at the road crew, which suggested that she could probably hold her own, which I can relate to a little bit. I grew up with an older brother, and they tend to make you a little thick-skinned and tough around the edges.
Yeah, they do.
So, so like Billy said, we were like, man, how could somebody come in and get this 6'2" girl out of her house? And I just thought, being a 21-year-old, I'm not leaving the house unless it's somebody I know. And I'm not opening the door for somebody unless it's somebody I know. So that's kind of the route I started going down with Billy. I said, you know what? Being a young female in a house by yourself, even if you could take care of yourself, you're not going to open the door for somebody you just don't know to come in the house.
Right.
So that led me down looking at people that he either worked with or was an acquaintance with.
And put her coat on.
That's the oddest thing, I guess, to me is maybe, and I know you just hang on one thing sometimes, but the coat, I think there kind of echoes what Elaine said about knowing someone, but it almost seems like that she may not have known them well enough to invite them in. She just grabbed a coat and stepped outside to kind of talk. And then that's how they got her out of the house, because that would kind of explain why she kind of put a coat on but didn't put shoes and socks on. But again, I agree with you, though. She had to know someone. She knew them well enough that she was disarmed by seeing their face.
Exactly.
And then the list of suspects runs the gamut.
Right. And before we get there, Elaine, talk about her shoes, not having any shoes on.
Yeah. So I know with the coat thing, that's something I kind of ran with Billy. I thought, well, maybe she had her shoes next to the door. A lot of times when you come home, you take your shoes off. So maybe if somebody showed up at the house, she went to grab a jacket because it was October, it was raining. So she went to grab a jacket, and then maybe she was going to put her shoes on at the door when either she was shot behind the ear or she was taken advantage of and pulled out the door or something like that. But she was a tall girl. So those shoes, I think in one interview with somebody, they suggested that Gail was healed for her shoes. And when I heard that, I just laughed at Billy. I said, you know what? I don't know how many girls would probably fit the shoes that a 6 foot tall
that's what I was
woman
about to
wears.
Say. I have a,
and that was a former detective on this case.
And that's what's laughable about some of these people. They don't even think about what comes out of their mouth. And
Exactly.
I coached high school softball, and we had some decently tall young ladies on those teams. And I can tell you, once they approach 6 foot, those shoes she's buying them off the men's rack. And so no ladies going after her shoes. I can tell you that.
That's a fact.
But yeah, was there anything else, Elaine, that kind of stood out to you just from the perspective of her cooking dinner and then kind of just being caught off guard maybe that night?
Not really in regards to, the cooking of the dinner and being caught off guard. I know we kind of went back and forth regarding her lending her Jeep to Ray, just because there were a lot of interviews regarding that Jeep was her baby. And she took care of that Jeep. She didn't let anybody drive that Jeep. And for her to let him leave in it was a pretty big standout for both of us.
Yeah, and that's another awfully convenient thing, right? So he drove I think, what was it, Elaine? It's like a 57, 58 Chevrolet, which was common in 1980. I was 15. I remember those trucks, and they were cool.
There was something about the battery. Was that what?
Yeah, he couldn't get it started.
Right.
He couldn't get it started to go get his drug dealing buddy. So he asked Gail to use her brand new, it was 1978 CJ7, I think. And that was it was a Renegade.
Yeah.
It was gray with blue trim. And to Elaine's point, I bet you there's at least 4 or 5 statements in there about just that. How particular she was, how no one drove. Anywhere she went, she drove. And then it took 2 people. It took 2 people to load her. Right? I bet you she was every bit of 150, if not 160.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say.
Right.
And then the only equalizer you've got if you are smaller would be your strength or a weapon. And
right.
But like you said, the evidence kind of leads you to that there is definitely another party. There's 2 members trying to get her where she was found.
Yes. And, and we also explore the political corruption, the law enforcement corruption that was just pervasive in Arkansas, which you guys have told stories, talked about cases on that. Fahmy Malik was
that's what I was about to ask
medical examiner. Yeah.
I was about to ask you, is this another Fahmy Malik? How could he pawn this one off on something?
Yeah. I mean, at least he didn't write it up as a suicide. So that was a plus.
Yeah.
But there wasn't really too much for him to screw up on this one, because they did find that she was shot, but they didn't know that until she got to the crime lab, because it was a 22 round, a short, out of a pistol, and it penetrated the scalp, but it was between the scalp and the skull, so it didn't penetrate, but it did concuss her. Right? It knocked her out.
Yeah.
And so that's our theory. Our theory is that she was shot at the house, thought she was dead, and then transported and dumped. And then when they either opened the trunk or whatever, they realized she wasn't dead. And then, so they had to pull her out and run over her, and crushed her pelvis. And that was the cause of death.
I know this is probably more information than either of you want to discuss, but do either of you feel like the condom with the semen in it, was that from the perpetrator, or was that something that may have been planted?
Staged?
Yes.
I'll let Elaine take that.
I mean,
that was suggested that it was staged.
It's awful convenient. You murdered someone and then you don't have that the thought to clean up after yourself and take the evidence away.
True. But some of these people that are considered suspects in our eyes aren't the sharpest
No,
knife in the drawer.
No, they're not. After reading some of those interviews, I was like, did you really say that? And they wrote it down?
Yeah, so they weren't the sharpest knives in the drawer, so, anything's possible. And then, it seemed like a lot of the players also had some kind of a crush on Gail. So you never know, in the heat of the moment, they just may have, saw an opportunity. I'm not real sure, or thought a little bit about revenge, that she didn't want to go out with him, maybe.
I do have to question the use of a condom. I mean, back in 1980, there wasn't AIDS. I mean, there were, STDs, but I don't think there was any reason to suspect that. So otherwise, and you're not worried about, her getting pregnant.
No,
right?
that was the other thing that.
Yeah, it's just baffling. So that suggests possibly a staged scene. And these people who were, I call them the, Dixie cartel or whatever you want to call them, which, they were just organized crooks to themselves.
Right.
But one of their MOs was setting up a patsy. Right. So that was just their book for hits. These hits, when they went down, it was either going to be a suicide or a straight killing with a patsy, or maybe and then the patsy, suicides himself.
Right. It's always convenient for the dimwit to have, gotten mind wheeled after drinking too much or something like that.
So, all of that is, what we're considering. That's very interesting. Another thing is her jeans. Okay, so her jeans and underwear being off suggests that she was sexually assaulted, right? So was her jeans and underwear removed to justify or support the condom? She also had fecal material in her underwear. Well,
and how
did that get there?
That's what I was going to say. That's going to be one of those head scratching moments of, well, if she was sexually assaulted, what is that being?
Well, it suggests that she lost control of her bowel before she was killed, or she was crushed, because she was crushed without her jeans on, because there's abrasions on her skin that indicate that.
Right.
So it leaves, I think, it leaves the assumption that she may have lost control when she was shot and concussed or knocked out.
And that's another thing I had not thought about until you brought it up about that not penetrate. I had read it not penetrating the skull and things like that, but it didn't dawn on me till you mentioned that earlier. She would have bled like she was shot in the head. So, I mean, that
right. And there was no blood pool
right
at where she was found. So that suggests two crime scenes.
Correct. Yeah.
That supports our theory that she was shot, that she was shot at the house and then moved to where she was dumped.
I had kind of hinted at it, but the laundry list of suspects, I guess, or players, let's just call them players in the game. That'd be an easier way to kind of keep this. Well, you've got the Frizzels, or was it the Frizzels they were renting from?
Yeah.
Okay, so do you think they're tied anyway into it, or do you think they were just clueless? And
no, I think they're all. And there's witness testimony that says as much. There's witness testimony that says exactly what happened, right?
Right.
But it was never scrutinized. It was never pursued. So that it does suggest, it doesn't say exactly that Barry Frizzell was involved in it, but it heavily suggests that he was. And, when we discuss this in Ozark Mountain Murder, we'll get into that.
Hey guys, Arlo here, and if you are struggling with the old caffeine in the morning, I have got the fix for you. It is called Magic Mind, and it is just a little 2-ounce shot that you drink with your coffee or your energy drinks in the morning. It is chock full of greatness, and it will get you focused, and it really actually has the L-theanine and that lowers your cortisol hormone, which helps absorb that caffeine that you're intaking. Now, Magic Mind has nootropics, adaptogens, matcha green tea, and 12 magical ingredients. That matcha boosts your energy. The adaptogens help with relaxation, and the nootropics keep you focused. A bonus is that it has vitamins C and D along with the echinacea to help your immunity. So head over to magicmind.co/brews and enter the promo code BREWS20. That is brews20, BREWS20. And that will give you a 20% off coupon for either a one-time purchase or subscription to a monthly dose of Magic Mind.
We're going to get into what the possible motive really was and whether it was her informing, what was it someone else informed and sold her out? Was it her stealing a large amount of dope from a pot farm? All of that surfaced in the investigation, but it was never taken to ground. And that's what Elaine and I are doing.
Right. And that's one thing that with y'all being near, it's kind of the curse of our format. You know, we are hitting cases every week. Some of them, like the one we originally had you on, shameless plug here, episode 35, those run sometimes a couple of episodes and then we're off to the next case. And so I'm kind of very envious about how you know, something local like that, you can get in there and really immerse yourself and do those, because I feel like it's been so long. A lot of these people kind of think that they've gotten away with it. So their guard's going to be down a little bit if you start asking questions, you know, and especially having Elaine there with you when you're asking questions, that's kind of going to disarm them as well. So, you know, it's just, hey man, you can talk to me. Her sister's looking for things. And so that's the angle that really.
Well, that's the trick, right?
Right. Yeah. That's the game inside the game.
Right. Is getting people to talk. Right. And that is, you know, for any aspiring either law enforcement or private investigators out there, the key is the environment and what do you think it's going to take to get this person to talk to you when they clearly have never wanted to talk about this over the last 42 years? Is that they were scared to death.
Right.
Right. And and you talk about a game inside a game. That's another game inside a game, is the culture of fear in this region. Right.
It's
for
rampant.
Years
I mean,
years and years.
We've run into
people. Yeah.
Yeah. We've run into it with Sheriff Baker.
Right. Oh yeah.
I can't tell you, you know, we covered Billie Jean's case and
yes,
Coach, within the last 2 months, about once a week, we'll have someone that has found Billie Jean's case because unfortunately no one covered her case except us. And they'll, you know, get on, like you said, first thing they'll do is get on Google and see if there's anything in Billie Jean's case. Well, one of the top 2 searches is our podcast because no one investigated it. And so
Michael Whiteley with the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, he's since passed, but he is what I consider, now he was a journalist, but he is one of the true heroes in Arkansas for being fearless.
Yeah, those scathing articles he wrote about Sheriff Baker while he was still alive proves that he had quite the backbone.
Yes. And I've managed to get to know the guy that was assisting him. He was young and just an assistant, carried his stuff for him, really. Yeah, especially, and did a lot of the research in the Madison County courthouse. And he describes it. He sets it for you in the stories, you know, where people would walk up to Whiteley just when he's walking out of the courthouse to his car, you know, threatening his life, his family's life. And Baker would be there. He'd just say, leave him alone. Just leave him alone.
And that's crazy. So, I mean, it is absolutely crazy.
Yeah, it's movie stuff.
It is.
Yeah.
And we've not been able to, not trying to hijack this episode, but the thing is with y'all, I'm trying to tie this back into y'all being local. We get emails from people that are around her case, and we can't go sit down face to face with them. If I could just even if Coach and I could travel a couple of hours to get there and sit down with some of these, we've had some family members contact us about her case. We've had the other side of the family member, cousin. So it's starting to work its way into that nucleus. But I mean, Baker still rules that county and that region from the grave.
Yeah, we've had people tell us straight. Oh, sorry.
No,
we've had people tell us straight up that they're not willing to talk.
Absolutely.
They're like, don't mention me. Don't say anything. Don't do this because I don't want anything to happen to me.
Yeah, and I'll tell you this. Yeah, I met him. I never met him, rather. I never met Sheriff Baker. I was in the Army on active duty during that era in the 90s before he died. But I have close family members who live in that county, and I have good friends who, knew him personally, went hunting with him, went to deer camp with him. And I understand that because they would be the first one to tell you, say, look, he wasn't an angel, but he took care of the people in Madison County, right? So with that, he built a strong sense of loyalty to the citizens there, and therefore the witnesses. I don't think Baker had anything to do with Billie Jean's death. I think he knew who did, and he also had other skeletons in the closet. And when Michael Whiteley wrote that article, or those two articles, he couldn't stay. And that's just my opinion.
Right. And
when I say he couldn't stay, he himself was taken out. Yeah.
Right. And that's kind of the angle that we've kind of gone back and forth in Messenger with some of these people that'll contact us is they said one of the things in the Billie Jean case was, well, like you said, he took care of the people in the county. One of the things that he kind of harped on was not driving through that low or high water bridge because he had seen enough people get swept away and things come through there. And they said that it was eerie for him to have attempted that, knowing that's what he told hey, when we get a little bit of rain, y'all stay away from that bridge or you're going to die. And
it's actually not because how things get misconstrued. From what I've heard time and time again is he never wore a seatbelt.
Right, but that night mysteriously he had put his seatbelt on.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and that's the crook. And and y'all can cut this out and maybe use it on another episode. But real quick, and then we can get back because I know we only have so much of Elaine's time that her husband allows her. But in 2010, my then employer was doing this big World War II veteran memorial thing, and I was honored to go and pick up a World War II veteran from the Huntsville, actually Kingston, and drive him to this event. And he was 94 years old then.
Dang.
Right. And he was as sharp as a knife. And he told me, he said, I knew Ralph Baker his whole life, knew him as a boy. And he says he was murdered and he never wore a seatbelt. Just as plain, just as like he was telling me the sun's in the sky. And with that's what lent the credibility to that theory for me.
Yeah, and then there's other theories out there, and we could hijack this whole episode about theories on Billie Jean's case. But and we did revisit it, and we had made a formal apologies because those articles we kind of used as our bread and butter
source.
There. Yeah,
mm-hmm.
And so, but.
People disagreed with them.
Oh yeah. That was an understatement. We got some of our first hate mail. Coach, you want to speak on some of the hate mail there? That
y'all get some Arkansas wrath, Coach?
Yeah, I mean, I may have said a few things I shouldn't have, and I got some pretty strongly worded criticisms. But we learned from it. We're more tactful.
Probably wasn't the first time.
No. But, it did kind of drive home that we are reaching an audience that's not just me and him anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, yeah, let's get us.
Yeah, I was just going to say the thing about Gail is, just another case, and we're just fortunate to have a case file, to have some living witnesses. Now, granted, they're peripheral witnesses because the folks that we think might have done it have been called.
Right.
But the objective is to find out who and why, and that possibility is still out there.
So we touched on Frizzell. Elaine, was there anything about the Frizzells that kind of stood out to you as a suspect or someone on the fringes of this case?
Other than the fact that they weren't interviewed and they lived in the house, that was a big one for me. I couldn't imagine how Gail lived at a house with these people and they weren't interviewed when she was murdered. But I think it was also in the case file where Barry Frizzell's lawyer actually requested that his pills be returned from the search warrant. So
I read that too, and I was like, boy, you got some stones on you. Hey, y'all kicked in the wrong door. Can I have my dope back? That was my neighbor.
Don't that beat all?
Yeah.
That definitely lent to Barry probably being somewhere in the drug realm.
Yeah.
And
he's in that orbit.
And the fact that he may have had some insight in the police department, considering, like I said, there was really no interview with him or his wife in regards to what happened that night.
And it's not like they were not spoken of. Like there was, I want to say in the case file when they're conducting the initial investigation and they're interviewing people, they come across a couple of people that had called the Frizzell's house and left messages for either Gail or for Ray. And so they knew by just some of the interviews that they had conducted in their, I guess, the first couple of weeks that the Frizzell's, they live, Gail and Ray was underneath them. So yeah, I mean, it's crazy.
One of the interesting factors in this case that has to be, considered. So her homicide happened on October 16th, 1980. November, I think it was the 8th, I could be wrong on that, was the national election, right? It was the same election that Reagan was elected. And so it was a big election. Well, Washington County Sheriff's Office was on the ballot.
Oh.
And the sheriff that had been Washington County's in that office since, I think, 1974, Herb Marshall, he was the first Republican elected to any citywide office in Fayetteville since Reconstruction. He was a Green Beret in Vietnam, and he was a law and order sheriff. But towards the end of his career, he really faced some pretty stern opposition and allegations and so forth and so on, and he lost his seat 2 weeks after this homicide. Within, he just kind of went road, right, which is retired on active duty. He just, did the inventorying, the handover stuff on the whole month of December, and then changed the office in January. And then with that, you had turnover. Right. You had a lot of folks that the new sheriff didn't want from the previous administration.
Right. And you see that in a lot of these smaller communities. Yeah. And we've covered cases in Louisiana where it had happened, and cases get pushed to the back burner. But yeah, go ahead.
No, I mean, that's it. I mean, and priorities change, right? People start focusing on election promises. And plus, who was this girl? She's from Mountainburg. Nobody knows her here. You didn't have any big, money dogs walking up and saying, we want this, cleared. We want this person found. You didn't have the media beating down their door because nobody, the Vaught's was a farm family from Crawford County.
Right.
So all of that played into this thing not getting solved. But it was also buried. Right. It didn't even hit the neutral level as far as interest. It was like in the negative.
Right.
It was purposefully and willfully buried.
It was the coldest of the cold cases over there.
Exactly. Right. So That's what makes it so interesting.
Now, getting to another, we got two more I wanted to touch on. Jody Balcom and Randy Wyman. Jody, and I can't remember.
Jody's still alive.
Okay.
So Jody, if you're hearing this, give Coach a shout. He'd like to just call him up.
Yeah. Coach would love to talk to you if you are available, Jody. He loves the Fayetteville area. So, yeah, please give him a call.
Yeah. So, yeah, Jody's still alive. He was one of Ray's buddies. You know, they just sold dope and drank beer and chased women.
Now, was it Jody that was trying to help him take his truck to get it fixed, or was that someone else?
Elaine?
That was Jody.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I was trying to think that whole dynamic, it's almost like you had alluded to, Elaine. Sometimes they're not the brightest in the interview process. And I'm like, y'all, you two bumbling idiots, if we could get someone in there with half a brain to just ask the right question, then this thing probably would have been solved. Because it would have been so easy to, separate them kind of thing. But that kind of ties into what y'all are going to cover. So I won't go into that. But now, was it Jody? There was something in the case filing. You can correct me if I'm way off here. Wasn't it alleged that one night Gail and Ray had gone to get some drugs or some beer from somebody, and they stopped by a liquor store and they picked up somebody and they took them to another house?
That was the night that she was killed, and we have our theory on why they were doing that. This is Ray and Jody. Elaine, you want to touch on that?
So, yeah, the night that Gail was killed, Jody calls Ray, says he needs a ride to go do his drug deal. And they end up going house to liquor store to another house. They pick up another person, go to another. So we kind of just got the feeling they were trying to gain as many alibis as possible for where they were that night, and trying to be seen by as many people as possible. But when I started drawing a map of where they were going, it's like they always ended up really around the house with Gail and where Barry lived. So they were still around the area, but they were definitely seen by several people that night going around looking for dope. But it seemed like they never were really able to find it until they ended up on Dixon that night.
Right. And that was the thing with that night in question. And so they're driving her Jeep and just trying to basically be
she's
seen.
Supposed to be making beans.
Right. And he's going to be back in time for the beans to be done.
Yeah. And cornbread. Yeah. Cornbread was in the oven, burnt.
And so that there is a Southern crime.
She was with cornbread in the oven.
Any God-fearing Southern woman is not going to put beans on and burn her cornbread. I mean,
from your mouth to God's ears.
That's right. This was someone that disarmed her just by seeing them come up. And so, and we chase this rabbit back around the hole again, but, she's not expecting to go anywhere. She's expecting him to be back pretty soon. She's got the beans cooking. She's got the cornbread going to come out when the beans are done. They're going to have a great meal. So,
and he's out running around, stopping, at every drug dealer's house in the Ozarks.
He had went and picked someone up, but wasn't one of the people that he picked up, weren't they looking for speed, and he didn't have any speed, but hey, I know Jimmy over here. And then they stopped at another, like y'all said, they're making sure that they're stopping and getting receipts so that they have this paper trail and witness statements that, we were nowhere near the house.
Elaine?
Yeah. So they went to pick up a friend, and that friend wanted it may have been speed. I'm not real quite sure what they were looking for. So they were going to go to a drug dealer's house. So they did stop at the liquor store to get some drinks on the way to that drug dealer's house. The statements are that he went up to the door to knock, but Jody and Ray stayed in the Jeep, so they didn't actually get out.
Right. That was the thing that kind of caught my attention was why are you transporting this goofball?
Well, let me just talk as somebody who bought dope in the early 80s, right? So back then, if you were looking for pot, right? And it was like, I know so-and-so's knows somebody. Then you go pick up so-and-so. It's like, hey, man, you know anybody that's got any pot? And he'll like, yeah, I think Billy Joe's got a pound. He's splitting up. But Billy Joe ain't going to talk to you. So you got to take homeboy with you to go visit Billy Joe and see if he can go in and get it.
I come in on the tail end of that. So there were some Friday nights and some Saturday nights in our little town that you find yourself nowhere near where you should be. And you're asking yourself, is this really how my life's going to end in the back of a Camaro?
In this part of town?
Yeah. My mama's not going to be proud. So yeah, I can.
And I hope I put on new drawers.
Yeah,
today.
That's right. I ain't going to embarrass her. I showered before I left the house now. But no, yeah, that is that. And I guess and if there's anybody else that I've left off, feel free to bring them up. But Randy Wyman, how does he play into this jigsaw puzzle?
I think Elaine's got a good read on Mr. Wyman.
So Randy Wyman, where do we start? So I believe at the time of Gail's murder, he was actually involved with Ray Foreman's ex-wife at the time.
I think that's right.
But he had also had a little bit of a crush on Gail Vaught.
That's right.
There was kind of a little bit of a
quasi-love triangle.
Yeah, I can't even say it was a triangle. It was more of a square going on here. But Randy was also, I guess, upset because he claimed that Ray had stole some marijuana plants from him. And so he had tried to get some money back from Ray regarding those. And it seemed as if he brought a couple of guys over to the Frizzell house trying to get that money back just a week or so before Gail's murder. But he wasn't really questioned too in depth by the police at the time regarding his whereabouts that night or what he was doing. But it seemed as if, he had a grudge against Ray is the way they tried to put it out as, because he says Ray beat his ex-wife who he was now in a relationship with, and he had stolen pot from him and he was trying to get that back or the money back from that.
Well, if he'd have just stopped with saving the woman's honor, he might have had a little credibility, but you lose all credibility when you're like, I gave him a couple of plants and he just never paid me for them.
Yeah. So there was a little suspicion around Randy's motives that could have come across at the time.
Right. And that was the one thing that I noticed in my just green, wet behind the ears dive into that case file is how every time it seemed like he opened his mouth, he kind of either he like self-incriminated himself, or B, he showed how not smart he was. And I'm trying to be nice. So, that's something that doesn't usually happen on this podcast, is me trying to be nice. But that whole Randy is I think Randy could have his own couple of episodes for y'all's podcast. I mean, what did Randy do today? And then y'all could just, just go off on what Randy had going on. So was there anybody else that's kind of in the orbit of I guess not suspects, but key players.
That's about it, really. I mean, there's others on the periphery,
right?
But not directly involved with in Gail's, sphere, if you will. But yeah, we look forward to sharing what we've dug up, and we're going to develop some theories, right? And we've got a couple, mentioned one or two on here, got a couple of other ones that we're going to get into, and hopefully, we're going to solve this thing. We're going to solve this thing in the first inaugural season of Ozark Mountain Murder, and if that's the plan anyway.
Well, we wish y'all all the luck in the world, and like I said, anything that we can do to help y'all, we can. We're roughly 10 hours away, but Coach is learning the Westbound and Down song, and he's going.
That's why the good Lord
with beer,
right? That's why the good Lord invented duck season.
That's right. That's right.
A reason to come to Arkansas. So.
Beer and duck season, even and now that Elaine has kind of let the cat out of the bag that she's a bass fisherman. I mean, that's another thing. You can bass fish almost year round. I mean, you can get me out there pretty quickly.
That's a fact.
I was just about to say, I do have a bass boat in the yard, and I'm only about 5 seconds away from the ramp. So,
well, there you go.
There's always beer in the fridge.
Got a bass boat and a Maytag.
And Coach can operate a dip net like y'all have never seen.
All I need is a good dip man.
He is your man. He works for pennies on the dollar.
I don't have a lot of pennies, but I do have a lot of beer in the refrigerator.
There you go. That's all you need is just have Coach sit on his own cooler, and he'll just switch arms when one tire's out.
Damn straight.
And then use the good arm when a fish is on the hook.
That's right. That's right. So is there anything that y'all would like to kind of highlight that your podcast is going to dive deeper into that we've covered tonight? Or
well, you guys have done an amazing job covering, these cases. I know some people try
Wait. Say that one more time. Say it one more time.
Well, I tell you what, y'all have done a fabulous job.
We're going to cut that out. That's going to be our new promo.
Telling the story of this crazy place called Arkansas. Now, it's a blissful place. It's a great place, but there's some dark corners, and y'all have done very good at bringing those to light. And so obviously that's why we wanted to share your air with you and kind of tell you about what we're doing with Ozark Mountain Murder, which is coming. It's in pre-production now, and we hope to get that out to folks on Spotify podcast here next couple of months. But what you're going to get with this is you're going to get a better understanding of this area and the kind of crime and corruption for both, extremely wealthy people, extremely well-known politicians. And I'm not even going to talk about the former president. He will never come up in this podcast.
It's a shame I can't do a good impersonation, or I would tell you that he would be in the bass boat with us in his voice. But
I did not have sexual relations with that fish.
With that dip net, I caught the biggest fish you have ever seen.
There you go. Yeah. So that's what we're going to dig into. Elaine is the brain, the brainchild of the operation, and so hopefully between the two of us and recorded audio, recorded interviews that we've conducted, we'll be able to roll this story out and solve it before we finish with it.
And that's ultimately, one of the greatest things. While we didn't necessarily have a key role in it, we were gifted Rebecca Gould's case. But the day that you find out they had arrested someone, I remember it wasn't long after that they had kind of said that he was going to plead guilty. And I found directions to where she was buried, and just overcome with emotions, never knowing her, but just feeling like just in that justice in that small little window that we got and I tell people this all the time, that picture that's used in her case, she reminds me of a young lady that I coached in softball who passed away at a very young age in a car accident. And so I think that's why I kind of gravitate towards her case more, but it is. And we wish y'all all the luck, and like I said, anything we can do to help y'all, if you need a fresh set of eyes, need some comedy relief, give us a call. We, you need a meme.
I just want to watch Coach shoot a duck.
Oh,
hey, it's a sight to be seen.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So, if anything besides solving Gail's murder, if we can make that happen,
icing on the cake right there. All right, well, Billy and Elaine, thank y'all so much for coming on, and like you heard both of them say, they are going to start a serial podcast, and they are going to dive deep in this case. And we can't wait. We will be promoting it here. So once it hits the airways, we'll promote it on our social media as well to get y'all up and going and get you a big following. So like I said, we wish y'all
all 300 of our listeners.
That's right.
Man, you serious?
Well, he's overshooting it by about 250, but but no, seriously, if anything we can do for y'all, let us know. And like I always say, Coach, you got anything else?
Oh, I don't.
Deuces.